This is one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. Culturally, you need say little more than the prodigal, and people can fill in a lot of the details. Even if they get them wrong, they have some sense of what the story is about. If you say the prodigal son, it fills in more for even more people. And in literature, in movies, and television, this story is portrayed over and over again. This is the most common passage pastors have treated. So I had very little work to do this week. All I had to do was find one of the thousands of sermons and copy it down. No, that's not true. I thought about this story, and I looked back over all of the passages on which I've preached in the past. Wow. It's been 9 years. In the 9 years that I've been preaching. And I was a little surprised, but I knew why. I've never preached on this passage before. And I know why. One of the reasons is everybody knows it. And on its own, it seems to stand. It seems to convey so much about forgiveness and repentance and coming back to God and God forgiving. It's treated in this section of Luke where Jesus is befriended. It's not that he's ministering to the unsavory characters of society. It's that Jesus is treating them as old friends. And people don't like that. So as I thought about this passage, I didn't try to get clever. I heard of a pastor I respect a great deal, my brother, in fact, who one time tried to treat it from the perspective of the fatted calf. He wanted a new voice. I think it was quite a bit tongue-in-cheek. But as I thought about this passage this morning, and I thought about our world, and I thought about what to say, and as I prayed, I thought about pain. And I want to talk about pain a little bit. This morning specifically, I want to talk about your pain. Now, this idea of pain is very, very personal, because everybody has pain. Everybody has areas in their lives in which they hurt. And if you're not ready to talk about your pain yet, I understand, because you can't really engage with something inside of you until you're ready. So if you're not ready, I would just invite you to tune out for the next 10 minutes or so. And in just a second, just a few minutes, we're going to be singing a wonderful old Fanny Crosby hymn, Jesus Keep Near the Cross. And so we'll get to that in just a minute. But every one of us has pain. It's highly individualized, and it shapes and colors the way we are and the way we see the world, the way we see other people, even the way we see a beautiful sunshiny day. It impacts every interaction we have, whether with people close to us or casual acquaintances or even people in far-off distant lands. We can suppress our pain and never think about it or deal with it, or we can also take it out on other people. Maybe not certain people, but we can take it out on some people. Can you imagine, as you think about the story in Luke, the pain of the father? He has 2 sons, and as I think of this story, I happen to have 2 sons myself. And I happen to be one of 2 sons. I also have a sister. We're not told whether there's a sister in the story, but I have a brother. And I try to put myself in the story, imagine it from the perspective of the son and from the father, from the older brother. And one day, this younger brother says, I want my inheritance. Give me what's mine. Now, when is an inheritance normally distributed?
He dies.
Yeah, after death. After death. So saying, can I have my inheritance, is tantamount to saying, I wish you were dead. Now the son doesn't say that. He just wants the money. As a father and as a son myself, I can imagine the scenario and start to get a sense of the pain of the father. Now, I can also, I can imagine the son's insensitivity. Every person who's been a son or daughter, which is all of us, can probably imagine a time in our lives, hopefully as a young person, and not recent, where we said something that was profoundly insensitive to one of our parents. Maybe it was only as a toddler or a little kid. But children have that ability to say things that they don't really understand what their ramifications are of what they're saying. But I can also sense the father's pain of hearing those words, but loving the son and recognizing, I will be dead someday. Why not? Pain turns to worry. The son leaves. He goes off. And these were before the days of texts and internet, and he couldn't update his Facebook status to tell what he's been up to in the foreign land. And he may have actually blocked his father from Facebook because he doesn't want him to see all the stuff he's doing in the foreign land. But the son has gone off, and the father's pain turns to worry. The son has been gone a long time, and when he does come back, the father doesn't ask him where he's been, what he's been up to. He doesn't say to him, I want a full account. These aren't the clothes you left in, son. This isn't the car you drove off in, son. He doesn't say, give me a full account. This was a lot of money. This was half of everything I've earned in my life. What did you do with it? Now the father models a kind of forgiveness that's beyond our imagination. It's hard for us to imagine it. With all the pain that he's experienced, we want the father to have something. We want that repentance. The younger son knows this feeling of longing because of what happened when he got to the foreign land. What he had is now gone. The friends with whom he partied are not to be found. Even in the midst of his pain, even in the midst of that longing to be back home, he remembers his father. And why does he remember his father? Because he remembers his father's love. He remembers the justice and fairness and the way that his father treated those under his employ. He remembers how good it was in his father's house. And even when he gets home, that love is overwhelming. It overcomes him. It overpowers everything that he imagined he would experience. I picture him struggling to make up his mind. Pride probably kept kicking in for a long time until he finally looked at those corn cobs and said, there's no corn left, but I could just gnaw on that for a while, and maybe that would be worth something. I've heard of starving people eating dirt just to fill their stomachs. And I picture him as he walked along the road with what strength, I don't know, because he's been so hungry. But as he walks along the road, rehearsing his speech, and instead of letting him struggle through the speech, the father doesn't even listen. He runs out to greet him. And in that moment, the pain the father has experienced, the pain for the son, is stripped away. Both forget their pain because of their experience of overwhelming, gratuitous love. Forgiveness comes from the welcoming person, the father, rather than from the repenting son. The son doesn't even get through his speech before the father is forgiving him, before the father is loving him. The father forgives the son, and he gives him life when he gives him that forgiveness. Gustavo Gutierrez writes about this passage. Failing to see the gratuitousness of love is failing to understand the gospel. Failing to see the gratuitousness of love is failing to understand the gospel. By converting the gospel into a mere set of obligations, external rules, or a guarantee of authorities without moral worth can make a caricature out of it. And what he's talking about there is what Jesus was addressing at the beginning of chapter 15. The people who were upset had made the good news of God, of Jesus Christ, into a set of rules. The people with whom Jesus is acting like old friends, they don't fit into that set of rules. Jesus modeled something that's so profound there. And I love the Gospels. I love the Bible because every time we see it, we see something new. This isn't something I thought about before this morning, but in those opening verses, we see a natural relationship Jesus didn't go out with a program of evangelism. He didn't go out with a plan to reach out to those unsavory characters of society. Jesus was loving them the way that the Father in this parable loves the Son. It's like the reading in 2 Corinthians. God reconciling the world back to God's self. Not saying to the world, you got to fit into our parameters first. Instead of calling this the parable of the prodigal son, or even the parable of the kind father, or any of the other myriad of names I've heard it called, this could be the parable of gratuitous love. Because this gratuitous love overcomes pain, and it can overcome the pain in our lives too. It gets very personal. No matter what caused our pain in the first place, no matter what the source of our pain is, this kind of love that is modeled by the Father, that we can take and extend and live out, is one that can overcome pain. In the 1987 movie, The Princess Bride, any Princess Bride fans? Or anybody see it? Okay, The Princess Bride, the protagonist is Wesley. But in this scene, he's dressed up as the Dread Pirate Roberts. And the Dread Pirate Roberts is he's speaking to the princess. And he's kind of coarse with her. And she says, "You mock my pain." And he says in response, "Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something." Buddhists say life is suffering. In the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, Koheleth says life is meaningless. And at times I can see where the Buddhists are coming from. Life does have a lot of suffering. And there are times where I can see what Koheleth in our Bibles is talking about. Life's meaning can be very confusing. There are times in our society where I can see what the Dread Pirate Roberts is talking about. Anybody who says life isn't pain is trying to sell you something. However, pain is universal. We've all experienced it. But all pain can be overcome through the gratuitous, incredible love of God. There are so many different ways that people experience pain. Teenagers, that's kind of I think this is the funniest kind of pain. Because whenever a teenager experiences heartbreak, for about a day or so, it seems like the world is going to end. I mean, it really does. It's absolutely convincing. For about a day or so. And it feels that way. Having been a teenager a while ago, I can remember that. It's just, I can't believe this is the way this is. And then the next morning you realize, it's not that bad. Or maybe a week later, depends. Young people apply for things, whether teens applying for college or scholarships or jobs or schools, and college students apply for jobs or graduate school or things like that. And although some get accepted to many things to which they apply, almost everybody, if you apply for enough things, you inevitably get that one letter in the mail. And sometimes that letter that says, "Thank you so much for your application. We regret to inform you," and it goes on. Those declination letters, the decline letters, can haunt you for years. Couples experience pain in all manners of ways. Sometimes they pray desperately for a child, but cannot conceive. Couples experience pain when the honeymoon is over. And sometimes when the relationship comes to an end. Getting older brings no less pain in life. There are as many opportunities to experience pain as there are possibilities in the human imagination. Now back in Luke, just a few chapters before this, Jesus says in Luke 6:36, "Be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate." He could have been adding this as a commentary to the story of the prodigal, or the story of gratuitous love. In Henry Nouwen's book, which he wrote all about this story of the prodigal son, he writes about these words of Christ, "Be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate." This is the core message of the gospel. The way human beings are called to love one another is God's way. We're called to love one another with the same selfless, outgoing love that we see in the Father in the story of the prodigal. Jesus is the one true Son of the Father, and He's the model for our becoming and living out our lives like the Father. In Him, the fullness of God dwells, and all the knowledge of God resides in Him. There is plenty of pain in the world. I don't think I really need to convince anybody of that. And we don't have to look far for it. But there is also love. This amazing, transcendent love of God. This love that is absolutely gratuitous. And it overcomes pain with joy. Jesus teaches about that love when He tells His listeners, the people who were criticizing Him for living out that love. No matter who He encountered, people who were coming down on Him about the people He was hanging out with, and He tells them the story about this father. Even though his younger son wished him dead in order to have the inheritance, the father still loved him. That's transcendent love. That's gratuitous love. If only we could be so loving.